anyhow, signifying that you respected the Lord and you depended upon him. But the Bible indicates that the offerings these individuals were giving were not sacrifices at all. But they were offering the Lord things that they themselves did not want. God, through Moses, specifically stated in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 1, "You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep, which has any blemish or any defect, for that is a detestable thing to the Lord." But these people were offering sheep and oxen that couldn't even see, couldn't walk, had all manner of disease. They were offering things to the Lord that they couldn't even pay someone else to take off their hands. Now remember, the offering represents the attitude of the offerer. So basically what they were saying to God is, you can have what I don't want. I'll only give you the things that I want to get rid of. And so the altar of the Most High God, for all intents and purposes, became the community dump. Saints, how many times do we offer God the same thing? As these individuals did, we often give God what we have to spare. The time we set aside for him are those few little moments at the beginning or the ending of our days when we're so tired that we lose consciousness in the middle of prayer or the middle of the sentence that we're reading. Worship tends to be restricted to 1 day per week between the hours of 11 to 1. But if we're feeling extra pious, we might make it to prayer meeting.
Mercy.
As the Israelites of old, we have come to respect and revere earthly rulers more than he who actually holds not just the world, but the universe in his hands. We tend to revere our employers more than God. Whereas we blindly adhere to the policies set forth at the workplace, God is somehow overstepping if he requires anything of us. Every occupation has rules, policies, procedures that are non-negotiable, and even some that, should we violate, result in on-the-spot termination. Nobody questions these. But when it comes to the guidelines that God has set in place, all of a sudden it's okay to pick and choose. We give ourselves license to interpret his regulations as we please. And based on our opinions and on our desires, we teach the traditions of men as doctrine. And because of these things, God, as God said to Israel, he says to us, where is my respect? Where is my honor? You give the best to the world, but what you offer me is deplorable. You ask for mercy, you request my grace, you pray for prosperity, and yet you offer me your leftovers. The things that you don't even want. You have required a sacrifice of me that cost me the life of my son. Yet you're too busy to find any time to talk to me within a 24-hour day. When you want something from me, you quote all sorts of promises saying, I must make my request known unto the Lord. Yet I seem to be overstepping if I make any request of you. You require my protection, yet I have no right to require your obedience. Understand, before exile, Israel forgot God because of abundance. Now, having returned from exile, the people allowed the difficulties they were experiencing to turn them from God's loving presence. They allowed the undesirable nature of their situation, the inconvenience of their circumstance, to give way to moral decay and spiritual nonchalance. Because God did not seem to be responding to the prayer of Jabez. Because they had not yet reached the season of prosperity. Because they had not yet gotten their breakthrough. Because the reservoir of blessing seemed to be as empty and dry as the air they were speaking it into. These people became indifferent to spirituality. As we do from time to time, these people were living in a season of lack. When everything around them seemed to be changing from bad to worse. Where everything that could be shaken was shaken to its foundation. They were going through a time where they had to trust the bare word of God. When they had to trust his heart when they couldn't trace his hand. When they had to serve him, although they did not necessarily understand him at the moment. But they were finding this to be difficult. They longed for manifestations, for demonstrations of God's power. And when these were not forthcoming, they grew weary in well-doing. These people were the predecessors of those of whom Christ spoke, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. They were the kind of individuals that hung around for the fish and the loaves. The kind of folk that only show up to church functions if refreshments will be served afterward. The Israelites got so bold as to question the love and the concern of God. And so God had to set the record straight. And so now we find this dialogue going on in Malachi chapter 1 verse 2. God says to them, look, I've loved you. The reply is, and I imagine in an indignant fashion, wherein have you loved us? I can't tell. Now understand that since God had delivered them from Egypt, he entered into an exclusive relationship with them, and he had not ceased to show them mercy and love and blessings over and above every other nation. But as we oftentimes tend to do, because people don't change, only times do, they look beyond the myriad of blessings to focus on the difficulty that they were presently facing, which was a consequence of their own disobedience. Because there were others around them that were prospering while they were enduring hardships, which again was due to their own actions, they began to say, as we find in chapter 3, certainly the evildoer prospers, and even those that challenge God escape. They allowed their skewed perception of their experience to divert their attention from the very clear word of Scripture. So they felt that perhaps maybe one time in the past God loved us. But what has he done for us lately? Like selfish children, because everybody else seemed to be prospering while they didn't, they doubted God's love and slacked off in his service. I can remember one Christmas where every Christmas Eve, my family and I, we get together at my grandmother's house as a family, and we eat, and we talk, and we laugh, have a good time, and all the kids get to open their presents. So now all my cousins and everybody are opening their presents, and they're getting good stuff. I mean, PlayStations, they're getting toys, like everything that I wanted. Now, I had gone over a list with my parents before this now. I said, look, these are the things that I want, all right? So, you can get, it doesn't have to be all of them. Just one. Just meet one of them. So while all of my cousins are opening their PlayStations and their Tonka trucks and all this kind of stuff, I begin to open my presents. And I open the first present, and it's a shirt. Okay, all right. All right, I need some shirts. I open the next, it's socks. Now, the number of boxes that I have is starting to dwindle. The first two boxes was shirt and the socks. I'm like, okay, maybe they're going to get it right within these next boxes that's coming up. And I began to open box after box, and I didn't get anything that I told them that I wanted. And I was upset. I had an attitude for the rest of the night that carried over into the next day, into my chores. I said, well, they didn't give me the things that I wanted to, so who says I have to wash all the dishes? All right. Or if I wash all the dishes, maybe I got to wash them as good as I ought to. And so for that whole week, I just had an attitude. And because I felt that my parents weren't doing what I thought that they should, it reflected on how I honored them. The same thing was happening with the Israelites. Because their experience was not what they thought it should be, it affected their worship. So God responds with a question that at first glance we may not understand. The Bible says in Malachi chapter 2 through verse 4, chapter 1 verse 2 through 4, it says, I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein have you loved us? And he asked him this question, was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau, and I laid his mountains to waste. And his heritage was waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Verse 4 says, whereas Edom has said, we are impoverished, but we will return and rebuild the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord God of hosts, thou shalt build, but I will throw down. And they shall call them the border of wickedness, the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. Now, just a surface reading of this text won't uncover the thrust of it. It won't hit like it's supposed to, so we have to do a little bit of digging. In this context, the word translated love can also be understood as chosen. I loved you, Jacob. I also chose you, basically what he's saying. So God not only loved, but he chose Jacob and rejected Esau. But according to this text, he did not just reject Esau, but he laid waste to his lands, and and he was never able to rebuild. It's kind of harsh, ain't it? Another thing that should be brought to light, if you did not already know, is that in this text, it's referring to the nation of Israel, which descended from Jacob, and the nation of Edom, which descended out of Esau. But still the question that begs to be answered is, why did God reject the nation of Edom and destroy them? Well, that had a lot to do with what was true about Esau himself, which was perpetuated by his descendants. Most of us know the story of Jacob and Esau, how Esau was the older brother and Jacob was the younger, and how traditionally the birthright, which was basically a double portion of the father's land and his wealth, was inherited by the older brother. But in a greater sense, what the birthright meant, which is pertinent to this context, was receiving the birthright meant that you were chosen by God to carry out his purpose. However, God chose Jacob, the younger, instead of Esau, the older. Now, as we know, at first Esau didn't even care about the birthright. Whether he felt that it was too much responsibility or it cramped his style or whatever, Esau was not concerned with a birthright which seemed to have no immediate benefits. So he hawked it for a bowl of lentils. But afterward, when he saw that Jacob was tremendously blessed spiritually, but most importantly to Esau, materially, he got jealous. He wanted it back. So he was going to take it back by force. He was going to take back by force something that he sold for beans. And so he was determined to destroy Jacob. Now, in the end of the story, it seems as though they reconcile and everything's hunky-dory. But as we read the prophecy of Obadiah, see, people don't really read that book for real. I would have missed it myself if I wasn't looking for this. The book of Obadiah reveals the jealous attitude that was passed down to his descendants. Now, I'm not going to read the whole book of Obadiah. It's only one chapter. When you go home, read it for yourself. Make sure I'm not lying to you. Okay. As he expresses in his prophecy, because Edom had fought against Israel and refused to acknowledge them as God's people, and because they constantly joined Israel's enemies and plundered them and would not come to their aid when needed, God cut them off and destroyed them. God in his foreknowledge chose Jacob even before they were born. Esau, despising the birthright while Jacob desired it, was only the outworking of what God already knew. So now, applying this information to Malachi chapter 1, verse 2 through 4, what we just read, God is giving evidence of his special election, his love, his choice of Israel. What he's basically saying is that I chose you before your forefathers were born. I chose you to be my people to carry out my plans. Out of every other nation, I chose you. I chose you even though traditionally I should have chosen Esau. And to prove to you that you're special to me, to prove that I have held you in higher regard than any other nation, look at how I have treated you in contrast to how I have dealt with Edom, even though both of you are the seed of Abraham. Even though you are both cut from the same cloth. When Edom fought against you, when Edom rejected you and destroyed your lands and made it into when Edom rejected you, I destroyed their lands. And I made it into a ghost town where the only creatures that live there are the jackals of the desert. Even though they say, we'll rebuild again, I've said not so. Because of their wickedness and because they fought against my chosen people, every time they try to rebuild, I will continue to tear them back down. They have received the full brunt of my justice and the full brunt of my wrath. Edom as a nation will never again be accepted. The only way an individual Edomite can see salvation is to become a part of you. That's what it's like to be rejected by me. That's what it's like to not be covered by my mercy. But how about you? What about when you have done the same thing? When you, O Israel, have rebelled against me? When you rejected me? What about when you went after other gods that did not bring you out of Egypt? Who did not bring you to the land of promise? When you, Israel, backslid and broke your promises to me time after time after time? How did I respond to you? I loved you. Even when right after I brought you out of Egypt, you made an image to some other god and worshipped it, I did not cast you off. Even though every moment of every day when I led you through the wilderness, you grumbled, moaned, and complained against me, I did not set you aside. Even though I had to discipline you from times, I never destroyed you. Even though you broke your promise to me time and time again, I never broke mine to you. I did not make you desolate. Because I have chosen you, even though you have endured hardship, you are still a people. Look at Edom. Their cities have been destroyed, but while you rebuild, theirs remains in ruins. If I did not love you, if I had not set special affection on you, if I had not chosen you, Israel, you would not be here complaining to me, because you would have been destroyed along with the rest of every other nation that have continually opposed me, yet here you stand. Things may not be ideal right now, but that's because you're suffering the consequences of your own actions. Understand that when God entered into a covenant relationship with Jacob and his descendants, he established a permanent relationship with them as a whole. Because of this choice, he will continue to instruct them in truth, train them in righteousness, care for them with compassion, bless them with goodness, and if he had to, discipline them to get them back on the right course. Regardless of how often they strayed from him, he remained faithful to them by his grace until his work in them was complete, and all Israel would enjoy the righteousness and peace and joy that comes from a saving relationship with God. No other nation, not even Edom, who was also the seed of Abraham, received such privilege. And God is saying it's not because of your worth, but because of my grace, because of my choice. I can remember when, when I was becoming when I was a teenager, I was going through that stage where I'm becoming a man, my testosterone started to kick in. Me and my dad began